everybody's gathered around the well, and the story of Ruth is about to unfold. In the days, first three words, so exciting. You're saying, what is exciting about in the days? Well, here's where you need a little Hebrew, because this Hebrew phrase means this: trouble is on the horizon, but a happy ending is guaranteed. Now, isn't that the best kind of story? Don't you love movies and books like that start out with conflict and trouble, but you know in your heart it's going to end well? Surely you've read a book, as I have, with a book that didn't end well, and you just want to throw it against the wall. In the days, people were already excited. Oh, good. This is one of those stories. From the very first words, we know redemption is coming. It goes on to give us a time frame. When the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A famine? This strikes fear in this girl's heart. No food. But of course, it's more than physical hunger. It also means the land is barren, life is desperate, people are needy. In other words, it's now. You know, I'm blessed to travel all around the United States, and girlfriends, I've never seen our country struggling so much. You'll see a whole strip mall of stores completely empty except the liquor store. We are right here. And I offer you Psalm 119 as a wonderful word of encouragement. Verse 50, my comfort in my suffering is this: your promise preserves my life. Here's the truth, and I'm saying this with great care, because it's a hard one to say. Tough times are part of God's plan. Tough times are part of God's plan. He is not in heaven wringing his hands about what's going on here. Are you kidding? He is taking our hands and walking us through the valley. Ecclesiastes 7:14 is one of those verses that most people don't underline. When times are good, be happy, but when times are bad, consider. God has made one as well as the other. Really? Makes me nervous. Really, Lord? Oh, that's right. You're in charge. We have to trust you. Think about the fact that God has something good for you on the other side of this. And, you know, we can't see that. And, of course, these women, you know what's coming in their lives. If you know the book of Ruth, trouble is coming. It's going to be tough. But God is with them through it. And I'll also remind all of us that real spiritual growth only happens in the valleys. It never happens on the mountaintops. The mountaintop is after the spiritual growth when you go, wahoo, we survived. But the valley is where the hard stuff happens. It helps, I think, to have a solid understanding of good old Romans 8:28. And you know, the truth is, you really only need the first part of the verse. And we know in all things, God works. Stop right there. And we know in all things, God works. Yay. For the good of those who love him, that's us, who have been called according to his purpose. So he is on both ends of this verse. God works, God's purpose. See, a lot of times people take Romans 8:28 and they hear it as life is going to be easy and everything will feel good. And that's just not what it says. What it says is everything will be according to God's plan, and for believers, it will end well. Think of that wonderful old hymn, "It is well with my soul." You notice anything about that? It's one note. It's one calm note. It is well. It doesn't say it's happy. This is a man who lost his daughters who wrote that song. It doesn't say he's happy. It is well. It is even. It's peaceful. God works for our good, for his purpose. Well, God is working for his purpose in Naomi's life and in Ruth's life and, of course, in our lives. So, we know the time of Judges. We know the problem, famine. Now we're going to find out where. A man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. Now, you and I just think, well, that's just another country over there in the Holy Lands. But you know what? the audience that day, when the storyteller said, Moab, would have all gone, not there. It's a terrible place, spiritually speaking. It's like the far country for the prodigal son. It's a risky place, a foreign place, an unfamiliar place, a place this former bad girl had a zip code. You know what I'm saying? It's that bad place you don't want to go. And the reason is, you'll remember the story of Lot's wife. Real quickly, we'll look at that. You remember Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt? That left her husband with no sons, which was a problem. So his daughters had this bright idea. Let's get our father drunk and lie with him so we can preserve our family line. The girls had this idea, not God's idea. And so indeed, they both get pregnant. The older daughter had a son. She named him Moab. He's the father of the Moabites today. Oh, so here's the problem with the Moabites. They started out of incest, which is why the Israelites hated the Moabites. And yet this family went there of all places. What were they thinking? They were thinking they were hungry. Now let's meet him. The man's name was Elimelech, which means my God is king. So obviously he's a godly guy. But he went to Moab. His wife's name is Naomi, which means pleasant, joy, my sweetness. And she is so not the woman we're going to meet. That name will not fit her at first. And the names of the two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. I love this. Mahlon means weakling, invalid, sickness, and infertility. Oh, can you imagine looking over your son's crib and saying, let's call him Weakness? Who would do that? That means every time you'd say his name, you're building that up in him. Hey, Weakness, come in for dinner. Invalid, we need you. What a mess. And Chilion means pining and consumptive. So that's the names they've chosen. Since we don't find a lot of Mahlons and Chilions in the church nursery, I call them Wimpy and Frumpy. Okay? Wimpy and Frumpy are not what you'd call strong male figures. They're not about to take over their father's role. And they went to Moab and they lived there. They didn't just vacay there. They moved there. Now, if God had led them there as he led Abram out of his homeland, we would have called them brave, but they went on their own steam, so we'd call them foolish. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. He just died. There's no description of how, of what took him, of how old he was, whether he was sick. He's just dead, leaving Wimpy and Frumpy, who married Moabite women. Naomi, you know, I'm thinking if she'd lost her husband, this would be a time to go home. But she's gotten comfortable in Moab. And what she is now is desperate for grandsons. I mean, that's why Lot's daughters did such a foolish thing. They were desperate for sons. They couldn't live on without sons. The family would end. And so she needs grandsons. So any wife will do, even a Moabite wife. And I'm thinking Wimpy and Frumpy weren't long for this world, and she knew that. So hurry up and get them married. One's named Orpah, which we aren't quite sure what it means. It's usually called the stiff-necked one. And then Ruth, which means refreshment, comfort, beloved, and friend. Interesting that we know nothing about their personalities, nothing about what they looked like, nothing about their station in life, just that they're Moabites, and that's enough. After they'd lived there about 10 years, hey, what did they do for 10 years? Don't you want to know? Here's the rule about God's word. If it's not in there, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the story. We just know that their time in Moab wasn't good, and it killed them one by one. And Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. Can you imagine this woman's pain? You know people who've lost a child. You know people who've lost a husband. But what if you lost your husband and both your children? Unbelievable. And yet, what does God the Father promise us? I will never leave you or forsake you. Naomi is not alone. And also, beloved, neither are we, because Jesus says to us, what? Surely I'm with you always.